Nice, right? I'm going to tell you 20 different things you need to consider if you're thinking about going out and buying your first ball python. And what a location to do it in. How amazing is this? I'm not going to put any background music over the top of this video because simply listen. Right on cue. So if you've came over to my channel from the herping videos or other types of videos, and you've seen me playing with me snakes, and you sat there thinking, I wouldn't mind getting a snake, these are the things I'm going to cover for you to need to consider before you get your first pet snake. So number one of the most important things you need to consider before going out and buying your first ball python is quite simple: how long they live. Ball pythons can last 15-20 years, even more in some cases, and they're a massive array of different animals. Now the joy with ball pythons is once they've got to fully grown, they're not really going to grow much bigger. They're more going to grow girth wise than anything, and they're not even going to get big girthy either. A ball python will only get to about 4 or 5 foot long, so a 3-foot vivarium is absolutely idealistic for the longevity and the full life of your ball python. You have to make sure you can look after that animal for its entire life, and that is stressed. I stress that point. You have to make sure you can look after the animal for its entire life. So many people can't afford to keep the snakes. The electricity bill goes too high, the food costs too much, the enclosure upgrades cost too much, and so on and so on and so on. You need to make sure you can look after that animal for its entire life. 15 to 20 years is a good guideline for how long a ball python should live. And number two, coinciding with point one, is how big they get. Ball pythons can get 4 to 5 foot big. The females tend to get a little bit bigger than the males. I don't know why, that's just how it is. Women are more dominant in the world. Note I said in the world, not in general animalistic land. In the world, women are more dominant. And number three is their environment, and it's just started to rain. Their environment, you need to match their environment, their temperature, their humidity, blah blah blah, all that other stuff. So make sure you do your research on where they come from. They're a sub-Saharan African species, so it's idealistic if you can not only research the care for the animal but also their natural habitat, so that you can start creating an enclosure that matches their habitat. So you need to make sure you can house that animal for as big as it gets. Various other snakes do get a lot bigger. Boa constrictors, mainland reticulated pythons, they all get huge. Make sure, if you're thinking of considering getting a ball python, that you can house it correctly. A 3-foot vivarium, as said previously, is absolutely perfect for the lifetime of the animal. If you wanted to get a slightly bigger one, feel free to do so. 4-foot enclosures, just good. Number 4 and 5 going together, the heat and humidity. 4 and 5. The heat is 86 degrees Fahrenheit on their hotspot, and I'll go into different hotspots and stuff in a few minutes. And the humidity, around about 60% humidity, is absolutely perfect for a ball python. You need to consider this and consider how you're going to maintain that heat and that humidity in a perfect enclosure. And you need to think that a ball python is a cold-blooded species, so it needs to thermoregulate its entire body temperature. It's cold-blooded, so not like us, where we can, if we get a bit warm, we'll just take a top off or something. Our body will automatically adjust the temperature to coincide with whatever temperature it is outside. Right now, it's nice and mild, it's a bit damp, I'm wearing a coat, and I'm comfortable. A snake, if you put the enclosure too hot and it gets uncomfortable, it can't regulate its own body temperature to be able to cool itself down or heat itself up like our bodies can. So you need to replicate a perfect enclosure. So if the enclosure is this big, you need to have a hot side and a cold side. So if it gets a bit warm, it can just go over to the cold side of the enclosure and cool itself down. So you need to have a 50-50 split, where it's a warm side and a cold side. You can achieve that by simply putting the heat source, whatever you're using to heat the species, whether it be a heat bulb, a CHE, ceramic heat element, a heat mat, absolutely anything, put it on one side of the enclosure. So your basking bulb, I'm going to use a heat mat for this scenario because it's a small-bodied animal. So heat mat needs to be set thermostatically controlled at 38 degrees to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and then that'll heat that side of the enclosure up. And then if it does get a bit too warm there, it can always just scurry out of its little hide, go over to the colder end, and it can thermoregulate its body. If the temperature in the vivarium is absolutely perfect for that snake in the middle, it feels comfortable in the middle of the enclosure, then that's where it's going to stay. It thermoregulates its entire body temperature. That's very important for you to know. Unlike most people think Ball pythons and all snakes are not slimy. They are not a slimy creature. They may look slimy, they may look slithery, but they're not. They feel kind of like leather, so to speak. And that's what they feel like. They don't feel slimy. It's a common misconception with snakes. What number are we up to? I forgot. I'll just start off at the next one, going to be number 8. We'll say 8 is the next one. We're going to talk about is food. If you're not comfortable feeding rodents, chicks, baby rats, baby mice, actual mice to your snake, then don't get a snake. Now, you don't need to worry about feeding them live food, because the rats, the mice, they're all classed as frozen, thawed. They've been frozen. They've been anaesthetized humanely. If you buy your food out of a reptile shop, a reputable reptile shop, then it's been anaesthetized humanely, it's been frozen, and then you need to get it out of the freezer, thaw it out, feed it to your snake. So you're not going to be dealing with live animals. It's actually illegal to feed live rodents in the UK. It's a very important point you need to consider if you're from the UK and you want the excitement of seeing a live mice go in and the snake get it. That's wrong in so many levels. Okay, it's really starting to rain now, but while we're talking about food, let's go on to how often you need to feed them. Like most animals, like most pets that get fed daily, snakes don't. Ball pythons are a weekly feeder. You feed them once a week, and you judge the size of the food that you give them. You find your raw python, get the thickest part of its body, say it's that big, or if it's a baby it's that big. That's how thick the food source needs to be. Keep a close eye on the weight of the animal, and that will determine if you're overfeeding or underfeeding. You need to bump up how often you feed, how little you feed, and all that sort of stuff. So it's idealistic once a week to feed. You don't need to go out, and you gotta really consider that, because a lot of people think it's a daily thing. They get to see the snake strike and it's exciting. Ball pythons aren't that exciting. They curl up in a ball underneath a hide in a log, something like that, and you'll hardly ever see them. Number 10, quite simply, is their handleability, how they handle all that sort of stuff. Now, ball pythons are great for handling. They're an absolutely amazing first pet snake. I say first pet snake, and I emphasize the word first, because number 11 is they're addictive. Be warned, snakes are addictive. Once you've got one, you can never just have one. You've always got to have another one, and then you see a different morph and you want that one, and then you see something else, you want that. Before you know it, a year later, you've got 12 pet snakes. Back to number 11. Number 11 was, or was it number 10? Was the handleability, the temperament, all that sort of stuff. And they are very placid animals. If you do find you've got one and it's a little bit nippy, all you got to do is just keep handling it over time, and over time you build a bond and a trust. Your snake starts to trust you and stuff like that, and yeah, they're great. Do not handle a raw python a day before feeding and 2 days after feeding, because you don't want them to have inside problems. You don't want them to regurgitate their meal. You don't want them to have any trouble digesting that meal. Number 12 is the new laws in the UK. I don't know if it's worldwide, but the new enclosure size laws in the UK. Your enclosure needs to be 2/3 the length of the snake. So if you've got a 4-foot snake, you're going to need a 3-foot enclosure, and so on and so on and so on. Now, there are many different types of enclosures you can use, you can buy, and a quick search online and a quick search in YouTube especially, you can find loads of different things. There's rubs, which are really useful boxes, basically plastic containers with a lockable lid to stop your animal escaping. You can use that with a heat mat under one side. You've got proper vivariums, which are big enclosures that you can really make look absolutely amazing. And because they're wooden, they're a bit darker, the snake feels a bit safer, and he'll settle in a lot easier. So my preferred method is a vivarium. And now I've lost count of what number I'm on, so I'm not even going to bother carrying on with the numbers. I'll probably stick numbers up when I go through the edit process and stuff like that, but I've lost count of numbers. So the next one, I suppose, is shedding. Right, now this is quite fascinating, I find anyway. Snakes, our skin is very elasticated, just like that. Well, a snake's skin is not, hence snakeskin shoes and stuff like that, and blah blah blah. But their skin's not elasticated. Their skin can't grow with their body, so they shed their skin, basically. When their body gets too big for their skin, they shed it. They basically crawl out of their skin, and they end up with a really bright, vibrant colours. The most The most beautiful you're going to see your snake is a day after shedding, by far. Now, just before shedding, you will see your snake's eyes go blue and really cloudy looking. Don't worry, your snake's not gone blind or anything like that. It's just getting ready to shed. It sheds its entire body, over its eyes, its nostrils, everywhere. The whole thing comes off. Now, if your humidity and your heat is absolutely perfect, it will come off in one piece, and you can stretch it out, and depending on what morph Royal Python you've got, you can see the pattern on the snake shed and everything like that, and it's absolutely fascinating. But one of the big common misconceptions with a snake shed, you get your snake shed and you hold it up and people think that's how long your snake is. That's incorrect. A snake's shed is every single piece of skin goes over every single scale, back in and over and back in. Now, when your snake is shedded, that's shedded. When your snake sheds, it's really long and straightened out. So your snake shed will always be a lot longer than your actual snake will be. So just try to guess the length of your snake instead of trying to sit there with a piece of string over the top of the snake and then measure the piece of string. It doesn't work. Don't measure the snake shed. It's an incorrect, inaccurate way of measuring your snake. If your heating and your humidity is incorrect, ever so slightly, then your snake won't shed properly. You're going to end up with stuck bits of shed on its body. Now, there is ways of removing that stuck shed, but that issue is easily avoided by you caring for your animal correctly. Some animals differ. Some animals have got problems, bone problems or whatever, and they can't shed properly. But any Royal Python will shed perfectly if its conditions are perfect, namely and mainly its humidity. Make sure the humidity is perfect and it will shed off perfectly fine, and make sure you've got a large enough water dish in the enclosure on the cold side of the enclosure so you don't increase the humidity. If it's on the hot side, the humidity will increase through evaporation. So make sure you've got a large enough water dish on the cold side of your enclosure so that it can get into the water bowl, coil up, and its whole body can submerge in the water bowl. That'll also help with shedding. Now, if you do have problems with stuck shed, the biggest problem I see is on the eye caps and on the tip of the tail. Now, on the eye caps, I'll always recommend going to a vet. Go to an exotic vet. Now, they're not massively cheap, but there are some good ones out there, and they can always help out with this. But if you've got stuck eye caps, so the snake has shed perfectly and the eye caps stay on, then you can submerge him in water, put him in the bath, let his humidity rise up, and then you might just be able to get a cotton bud, a Q-tip, and just gently rub it over the eye, and that scale will eventually come off, and it will come off in one big scale. And now on the tip of the tail, again, same again. Put him in the bath, leave him in the bath for 20 minutes. The bath water should be the temperature no hotter than its hot spot in the enclosure, 88 degrees Fahrenheit. And then when it's in the bath, it's just milling around, doing its own sort of stuff. Put him in a towel, wrap your hand gently around him with a towel, and then the snake in the middle, and the snake will just crawl out, and chances are that tip on the tail will just come straight off. But if your humidity is correct in the first place, you won't need to do that. That's just a little bit of backup advice, so to speak. Now, you've got to think of long-term expenses. The long-term expenses are electricity, your enclosure upgrades, any apparatus, any decor or anything you want inside, the hides, because you're going to need to increase the size of the hide as the snake grows. Obviously, you need it to fit in the hides. I've got a fly just here. Oh, I just caught a fly. Oh. Yeah, you're going to need the long-term expenses. So a heat mat, I use a 14-watt heat mat in my my ball python's enclosure, and that cost me £2.55 per week to run it on my electricity supplier. You've got the expenses of enclosure upgrades. Now, a 3-foot Viv Exotics vivarium will run out at about £100. You can get them second hand on the second hand market, Gumtree, Pre-Loved, Spark, anything like that. But I'd always recommend going brand new, or going, if you do get a second hand one, sterilise it massively with F10 disinfectant. My Royal Python feeds on medium rats. They cost me £2.35 per week. So take that into consideration on your long-term plan as well. And then other expenses is just gauged on as far as your imagination can go. So your decor, your bedding, your hides, your heat bulbs. If you're using heat bulbs, they blow out a new heat bulb, and so on and so on and so on. So it's just as far as your imagination goes. There's always going to be expenses when keeping reptiles. It's best to consider them before going out and buying your ball python. And then we'll revert back to the humidity again. Now the humidity has to be 55 to 60% humidity. 55 to 65% humid. Now you can get hygrometers to fit in the enclosure that will gauge that for you. I'd always say get one or two, one at each end sort of thing. And if the humidity is too high, there's plenty of things you can do. I've done a video on how to lower the humidity. Now I've done it for the bearded dragon, but the same applies for a royal python. I keep saying royal python and ball python, they're both exactly the same. Royal python is a British name, ball python is American. So I'd always recommend going to a breeder over a chain supermarket for your royal python. And one of the last ones right here is research. Not a lot of people do enough research. You can't just go onto one website and read what it says and that's it, it's done and dusted. That doesn't work. There is never too much research. Sometimes the research, you can get bad advice and good advice, and if you're new to keeping or new to thinking about getting a royal python, then you don't know the difference between them. So again, ask the breeder. If you've got a conflict of advice, ask the breeder. He'll be able to tell you his opinion and the way he does things. But there is never too much research. You can never ever do too much research. And then the most serious question of them all, and I repeat this, the bag's coming off, this is a serious one. Oh, it's wet now. Why do you want a royal python? That's the serious one. Yeah, have you got plans for breeding? Have you got it for fun, just as a pet? Something for the children to see grow up? It's going to be around for the whole of the child's childhood, so why not? It's a great idea. Now, if you're going into it through breeding purposes, there's an awful lot you want to look into besides just how to keep a ball python. The various genes that are, especially in the UK, stuff like the spider gene, it's not allowed to be sold in the UK. So if you're breeding the spider gene, you're going to have nowhere to sell it to. And stuff like that. So there's a lot more research you want to do into that sort of side of things. But it's a serious question. Ask yourself, take your time to decide this, but why do you want a ball python? Guys, check it out. I've got an audience. Look at that. He's gone quackers. So if you've listened to all of these things to consider and you still think, yeah, a ball python is a good option for me, I really want one. The next question, the big question, is going to last with the snake for 15, 20 odd years. What are you going to name him? What morph are you going to go for? Because ball pythons have got so many different morphs. Now, morph is a posh word for their coloration, so to speak. You've got the general, what's called the normal ball python, which is the colour it would come out of the wild. That's a normal coloration. There's so many genetic twists, so many different morphs that you can go for. So have a search, a Google search, ball python morphs, and Google image that and you'll get millions. Pick which one you like and go out on the search for it. Personally, I like pieds. But that's about it, guys. I'm going to love you all and leave you. I hope you have a great experience with your ball python if you do decide to go and buy one. If you're new around here, please hit the thumbs up button if you've enjoyed it. And if you're new around here, hit that subscribe button. Peace out, guys.